As you can see, I'm not Jeff. I'm filling in for Jeff, and I'm going to try to continue in the same series of lessons that he's been doing here. Fair warning, I'm a little out of practice at teaching. I'm going to have to juggle the slides and remember to change those, so if I forget, somebody tell me. And I've got the slides from Jeff. Of course, we've got Brother Harkrider's book, and then I've got some notes of my own. So I'm going to juggle all three of those, and hopefully it'll end up being a good discussion. Speaking of the book, does anybody not have book 2 yet? Okay, we're going to be in book 2, lesson 2. And as you can see on the board, we're going to be talking about creeds and the Bible. Steve's got some books if anybody else needs one. I want to start off with kind of like a little, this sounds really loud. Is it loud? Okay. Start off with sort of a little pre-quiz and just make sure that we're all kind of talking about the same thing. We're going to be talking a lot about creeds and false teachers today. So somebody tell me, what is a false teacher?
Anyone who teaches a doctrine other than what's in the Bible.
Anybody that teaches a doctrine other than what's in the Bible. Okay, anything else? Why would somebody be a false teacher?
For lucre's sake.
Sorry?
For lucre's sake.
Okay. What else? Okay, lack of knowledge. Okay. What else?
Because people want to hear something false.
Okay.
Tickle their ears.
Okay. And we're going to get into that when we start talking about why it's able to exist. But as far as the motives for the person himself, anybody think of any other reason why somebody might be a false teacher?
To get what they want. It's kind of like the Apostle Paul's excuse whenever he was teaching the gospel. He asked, why would I teach the gospel whenever I was in the position I was in before I taught the gospel?
Yeah.
He was the Hebrew of Hebrews. He had everything that a person would want, religious lives and fame and notoriety.
Yep.
And the zeal that he had. So you can just kind of go the opposite of that, and you can kind of see what a false teacher is.
Yep.
From that point of view.
Yeah.
Judy hit it, for the main reason, just like these TV people, they get on there and
Yeah.
they're paid to
Yep.
spread false doctrine.
Yep. Yeah, I had put, Carl, what you were saying, I put down like they have ulterior motives. There's something, whether it's the fame, the power, or something. So you all have covered just about everything I had. How do false teachers come, or how do they appear? What's the Bible tell us about that? In sheep's clothing, that's right. So they don't make themselves known, and in fact, some of them may not know that they are false teachers, like we talked about. So congratulations, we've already covered question 1 in the book, and that's from Matthew 7:15. It says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." Okay, creed. What is a creed?
Brother Chuck, I think even that description about being ravenous wolves gives us a characteristic about them is just they have no care for anybody but themselves.
Good point.
It's a selfish ambition that they have.
What about a creed? Anybody want to try to define what a creed is?
It's man-written set of rules by whatever they're a part of.
Okay.
And we've always said we don't have any man-written creed. The Bible is our creed.
Right, right. And that's the distinction that I want to make. Go ahead, Jacob.
So, a creed, I suppose, fundamentally would be a code and an identity that you subscribe to. I'll give you an example. When you're in the military and you're in a uniform, you have a creed, and that's why you can't just do anything that you want whenever you go into a war zone or anywhere in that uniform.
Okay. So defined, and I think this was like Webster's.com or something, a creed is a system of religious belief, a faith. So technically, by that definition, we do have a creed. It's just 100% based in the Bible. And I wanted to make this distinction before we started the class because we're going to be talking about creed books. And generally speaking, when I say that during this class, I'm talking about the man-made creed books, okay, not our creed, which is 100% Bible-based. And just to talk a little bit quickly about a creed book that is made from man, does it change over time? No. I'm talking about a creed book that like a denomination uses. Mm-hmm. Okay? And generally when it changes, it's to water down the truth, isn't it? In fact, generally, the creed book does water down the gospel. It makes it easier to swallow, for lack of a better way to say it. It makes it maybe more appealable to man. And that's one of the purposes of it.
There's denominations that have added the LGBTQ myth in with their creed.
Great example. Yep, perfect example. And that's one of its fallacies. The Bible does not change, right, over time. It doesn't change. It has an amazing ability to cover everything, no matter what the time is, but yet it doesn't have to change with the times. So I wanted to point out, too, just so you know maybe where I'm coming from in some of my comments, I was born and raised Catholic. And I say that born and raised because I didn't choose it. My family was Catholic. I was born, and you just kind of become a Catholic. During that time, I did not know that was false teaching. And so I think it's important for us to realize, too, when we talk to other denominations, at least most of them probably don't know that they're being taught false doctrine or false creeds. So that gives me a little bit of experience with false teaching. So sometimes you might see in my comments, if I talk about false teaching, it's going to be some of the stuff that happened in the Catholic faith.
Brother Chuck?
Yeah.
I think that would also be another useful distinction to flag is not everybody who speaks false doctrine or stands for man-made creeds, for that matter, would fall into the category of false teacher as defined by somebody who's a ravenous wolf. Like there would be a difference between somebody who believes something false and somebody who teaches something false for selfish gain and pretends not to.
Yeah, I would agree that there's differences, but they're all still false teachers. I mean, even if you teach something falsely, unknowingly, you're still a false teacher. You just don't know it yet. But I get where you're going with that. But yeah, the point I guess that I'm making is when I started coming to that realization, that's like getting hit by a ton of bricks. It's kind of like waking up one morning and finding out gravity's not real. Because you're taught from a young age, certain things, and then you find out none of that was true. So anyway, enough about false teaching. I'm holding it backwards. Okay. So the first point that's made in our book is just a simple conclusion that false doctrine does exist, and we've already mentioned a few examples about that. And false doctrine being, like we said, anything other than the Bible. And it could be whether we're talking about, a full-blown religion like Muslim or Hinduism, or denominations here in America that even claim to be Christians, but they have their own creed books, they have their own beliefs that go contrary to the Bible that they follow in addition to that. Brother Harkrider points out in his book that most denominations try to convince you that the differences don't really matter. It doesn't matter what church you go to. We're all following the Bible, and in part they are. Most of their creeds will be, some large percentage of it will be based on the Bible, but then there's parts of it that are not. Has anybody ever heard the the expression, we're all going to the same place, we're just taking different paths to get there. That's that mentality. That's the denominations trying to say the differences between, Methodist, Baptist, Lutheran, whatever, that doesn't matter. We're all getting to heaven. We're all just going about it a little different way. What's wrong with that?
There are different paths. It's only one.
Yep. Brady.
There's a verse that talks about the straight and narrow path that few find.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not always going to Christ. I think I heard one of the talk show hosts is like, there's many ways to go to heaven.
Yep.
There's only one way.
Yep.
But there are many ways to get to hell.
Good point.
That's the real crux of the issue, is that, a lot of people are going in the same direction
Yeah.
in different ways.
Yeah.
And it is super sad, which obviously creates our responsibility.
Yeah. Anybody else? Carl?
And that's something that allows the truth to be distinguished from anything else as to how well it stands, how well it can be supported, and how well it contradicts falseness. And I think, I don't know, you may be able to speak to this coming from your background. When I know I've heard people come and worship with Christians, after the service, they comment how different it was and how much time was spent in the Bible and how much scripture was used. And they've never been in a situation like that. And they were edified. They tell me that I was encouraged. It was refreshing.
Yep.
And that's God's charge to us. For those that thirst after righteousness, it feels different when you hear truth. And I just think that that's a big characteristic about that allows it to just tower over man-made creeds.
Yep.
I mean, even those that were sent into the temple after Jesus to arrest him, no one ever spake as this man speaks. I mean, it's a different gospel.
They do not encourage you to read the Bible yourself. In fact, I remember, and I went to a Catholic school. I was taught by nuns, the whole 9 yards. Never owned a Bible. Never encouraged to pick up a Bible. They printed what they called, I think it was missalettes, and they would give you certain verses that you would study each quarter, each month, or whatever it was. And I even remember priests making comments such as, well, you can't understand the Bible. It was written in Latin, so we're here to help you understand it. So, but don't get me started on too much of the Catholic stuff, or I will definitely not get this class done.
They definitely have their own creed.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm still, looking back, that was a long time ago, and I still, learn things and go, where did they ever get that? But anyway, here's the big thing, I think, that makes this point. If it makes no difference, the different denominations and all this, then none of them are false, right? If there's no difference, then none of them are false. Therefore, there wouldn't be any false teachers. And so why are we warned so much throughout the Bible about false teachers? I didn't have time to do a count, but I would venture to say we're warned about false teachers more than we're warned about anything else in the Bible. Don't you think so? It's everywhere you go. Jacob?
Well, one of the other things that rings false, for lack of a better term, about the idea that the differences between the denominations don't matter is the people who founded the different denominations would disagree. That's why there are different denominations. Like the fact that different denominations exist in the first place pre-accepts the premise that the differences matter.
Good point. Good point. So in those warnings, the apostles, in fact, Jesus himself warns us, we already read that in Matthew 7:15, to beware of false prophets, that they come as in sheep's clothing. Paul also warns us, if somebody could read 2 Corinthians 11, and we're going to do a little bit more than what was in the book. We'll do verses 12 through 15. Okay?
But what I do, I will also continue to do, that I may cut off the opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be regarded just as we are in the things in which they boast.
So I got mine out of the ESV, which is a little different, but the same points were made. They're deceitful workmen, but they disguise themselves as apostles of Christ. Satan disguises himself as the angel of light, and his servants disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. So that's the coming in sheep's clothing. They conceal themselves as somebody that you might want to listen to. 1 John is almost entirely about false prophets. 1 John 4 starts off, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world." And then he also warns us in chapter 2, 1 John chapter 2, and he's talking about the Antichrists here, 1 John chapter 2, starting in 18. "Children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard, the Antichrist is coming. So now many Antichrists have come. Therefore we know that it is the last hour. They went out from us, but they were not of us. If they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out that it might become plain that they all are not of us. But you have been anointed by the Holy One, and you all have knowledge. I write to you not because you do not know the truth, but because you know it, and because no lie is of the truth. Who is the liar but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, he who denies the Father and the Son." And then finally, Paul, and there's more, but Paul calls out in Galatians 1 some people who are apparently just starting to follow some false teaching. He says, starting in verse 6, "I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you have received, let him be accursed." False doctrine is like poison. If even just a little bit of it gets into your faith, it poisons the whole thing. We are going to talk about why this can happen here in a minute, but any comments up to this point?
Well, first, second, and third, John and Jude are, all that is about false teachers, warning against listening to them.
Yep. Josh?
I remember Paul, before leaving, I think, forgot what it was at, he called the elders and the brethren and he told them upon his departure, there are going to be grievous wolves coming in, some of you within the church. And he told them to be aware of that. And when you look at various chapters throughout the Bible, it talks about do not be deceived. It just keeps repeating that all and over and over again.
Yep.
You know?
Dylan?
Also, just the way false teachers are described in the Bible, it's very it's not obvious that they're false teachers. Like, you actually have to dig and see and evaluate whether or not the things they're saying are true and, like, looking at the fruit of their works.
Yep, that's a good point. Okay, let me ask you this. Why can a person sell anything? They're selling a car, they're selling a product, they're selling a service. Why are they able to sell it?
Gullible people.
Gullible people.
Because they are able to convince people that they want.
Okay, they can be convincing.
Yeah, the desire of the heart.
Somebody desires it, right? If somebody wants it, then you can sell it to them, right? Same with false doctrine. False doctrine couldn't spread unless there were people out there. So what we're going to talk about a little bit now is how it's allowed to sort of fester like that. 2 Timothy 4, 2 through 4 is in our book, and it's a perfect example. Here Paul is encouraging Timothy, but he says, starting in verse 2, "Preach the word, be ready in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort, with complete patience and teaching, for the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander off into myths. So there has to be people out there willing to listen, and we talked about the reasons why they're willing. This phrase right here, will not endure sound teaching, kind of strikes me. Has anybody thought about this? What does that mean? They won't endure sound teaching.
They're the ones that plug their ears, gnash their teeth, and stone.
Yeah. So something about the truth doesn't agree with them. So that, I don't know, maybe that's in combination with the itching ears, or maybe it's a separate reason, but what comes to mind is somebody who's living in sin, and they know that the truth condemns that sin. They're going to go find a different church to belong to, right? Or none at all. But they won't endure sound teaching. Dylan.
It's like sound teaching isn't always easy to receive it.
Right. Which is why, again, if I'm going to write a creed book for man, I'm going to make it easy to accept, right? I'm going to make it where everybody can come. So after reading 2 Timothy there, is it still happening today? Yep, it's no less today. We've already talked a little bit, but anybody else have any more comments about why it's still happening? Jake?
This isn't so much a comment about why it's still happening, but I wanted to note something that all of these scriptures warning us about false teachers have in common is all of these warnings trying to figure out how to phrase it. All of the warnings assume it to be true that we will be able to do what the Berean Jews did and search the scriptures to find out what we're told are so. In other words, the apostles in these writings to the various churches and ultimately and indirectly to us, they give us credit for and the responsibility for being able to tell the difference.
Preeminence of man.
Yeah, man's will. Yeah, I had just put down some other things. I mean, there may be cultural pressures, there might be peer pressures. And like we've discussed, the allure of doctrines that seem easier for whatever I want, whatever, I want, yes.
And really, because of all the warnings, if we're not careful and we don't search, what we're being taught to make sure it's real, then God's going to allow it to be our truth, which it says even in the word, it is a very scary thought.
Yep.
Not realizing what the truth is from a lie.
Yeah.
They both seem the same, so.
Perfect segue into 2 Thessalonians 2, 10 through 12. And this is, why this is so terribly dangerous. And with all wicked deception for those who are perishing because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore, God sends them a strong delusion so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Any other comments before we keep going? Austin?
In terms of like the validity of a lot of these false doctrines, it reminds me of why they're putting a lot of plastics into cars and stuff like that. People want it cheap, people want it certain ways, they want it to look nice, they want it to sound, meet emissions, whatever. But the whole thing is what they truly want is a car that runs and operates. But we put on all this other stuff, we're putting makeup on the table. Again, the true desire they need is a vehicle that gets them from point A to point B. How they do it doesn't matter. So now we falsify what a vehicle is by putting other stuff on top of it. And similar to what they were trying to do with circumcision. They said, the Jews said the Christians need to be circumcised. And there was a whole debate about that. And Paul says, you know better. You know better. You don't have to be circumcised now. So it's again bringing on top of and saying we know more than God himself.
Yep. Good point. Okay, I am going to have to pick up the pace a little bit here. If it makes no difference what we believe, then it makes no difference what the Bible even says, right? So that brings us to our attitude about the Bible. And I think this is an area where a lot of people that I know anyway think there's some gray area here, think that, they can quote, they can say that they believe the Bible, but yet they agree with things like abortion or homosexuality or something. And I don't know how they justify that, but a neighbor of mine even told me one time, and he was actually trying to defend the Bible, but without knowledge. He said, we were talking about people who believe in, evolution or whatever, and he said, well, yeah, God created everything, but he could have done it through evolution or a big bang. And I thought, what a silly statement, right? I mean, he was trying to, defend God, but his lack of knowledge there kind of showed through. So I think we have to remember, see if this works. It's not a class unless something technical goes wrong. We have to know, let me just ask you, how do we know that the Bible's complete? It says so. Jacob?
So complete implies two things. And one of those things is that there's no more of it coming. And the way we know that is that the people who wrote by Revelation had power over the natural world that came from God. In simple terms, they could perform supernatural miracles. That was how they could prove they spoke from God. People don't do that anymore. Therefore, there is no new revelation.
Great point. Anybody else?
Well, that means people that, some of the denominations like Jehovah's Witnesses who say they had a revelation are not true.
Right. Yeah, I look at this like it's a yes or no thing. You can't say you believe the Bible and follow that with but, and go on to say what parts of it you don't agree with. Dylan?
I think of John 20, 30, and 31, how Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe, and how there could have been a lot of other things recorded, but ultimately the purpose of what was written has been fulfilled.
Yep.
And on top of that, the source of it all, Jesus said, I'll send forth my disciples. We have the apostles. They had a definition of what an apostle was. Paul was the last born out of due season. And all of this is incorporated and encompassed in the New Testament. It's self-defining. And that goes back to the point of truth earlier. It's so conclusive that even Paul says, I'm not going to tell you anything that hasn't been given me to tell you. That's how you'll know that it's the truth. And so it's all self-supporting and beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yep.
Also, when you look at the last part of the book of Revelation, it says, anyone adds or subtract from the word of God, your name's going to be taken out of the book of life.
Yep.
It's already complete.
Yep. Sorry. I thought there was something else. Our book pointed out a couple of verses, 2 Timothy 3, 16, 17, very familiar to most of us. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for teaching in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. So like we said, it tells us. 2 Peter 1, 3, his divine power has granted us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us in his glory and excellence. It's not only our book of instruction for how to live here on earth, but it's also our guide to salvation. As we read in Romans 1, 16, 17, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. So to sum all that up, the Bible is complete. It covers everything. It's all we need. We don't need creed books. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, another question for y'all. Does knowing you should change the oil in your car every 3,000 miles help your engine?
That depends on whether you act on that knowledge.
Make a note, no more trick questions for this group. That's exactly my point. Knowing it doesn't help at all. Acting on it helps, and it's no different for the scripture. We can know it, and there are people who know it and then don't act on it. Matthew 7, 21 and 23 was in our book. It says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven. Let me stop right there. What does that mean? Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord. So who are we talking about?
That's an active one who's calling on the name of the Lord, claiming to follow the call.
Yeah, in other words, somebody who has some knowledge, right?
Somebody who confesses with their mouth that Jesus is Lord. That this is Jesus talking. He says, "Calls me Lord." In other words, somebody who would say to Jesus, "You are the Lord. You are my Lord."
Right.
And he's saying that alone doesn't count.
Yep. So not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter in the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? So we're talking about people who had the knowledge and even did some things thinking that they were okay. And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. So if we're all going to heaven, we're just going about it different ways, everybody's okay, who are these? Who are these people then? These people wouldn't exist, right?
You don't need the scriptures if that's the case.
Yeah.
Well, I know several people, and they have believed, and I've listened to several preachers, the scientists, or they just say, if you accept the word of God and say, I believe in you, then you will be saved. But they don't talk about anything else.
Yeah.
So I don't know that they're saved.
Acting on your belief.
There is, I'm not sure where it is, but the apostles came to Jesus and said, this guy is healing in your name, but he is not one of us. And they were trying to get rid of him and shut him up. And Jesus said, no, if he's healing in my name and he's doing good, then leave him alone. So
Yep.
that kind of, some of these people are doing good, but they just don't have all the truth.
Yep.
Again, that's where God's judgment in that is true. He knows our hearts, and it kind of goes back to the point where we were talking about attitude a minute ago. God knows the intent of our heart, and we have to be very dedicated in trying to be doing our best to follow Him. But we know that we're not going to be able to do that perfectly. But it goes back to the false teacher who's a ravenous wolf who's intentionally misleading. And so God takes all that into consideration, and we have to be mindful of that, but we've got to do our part in making sure that our attitude is to be as pleasing to Him and to be as diligent in His service as we can be in order for Him to extend that grace and righteousness to us. That's part of walking in the light. As long as we walk in the light, we're in the light. There's no sin in us. Why is there no sin in us? Because God forgives that sin because of our intent of being pleasing to Him. It's along that line of thought.
Jacob.
So two important tie-ins. One, what Carl just said ties into your question earlier about who are these people that we just read about in Matthew 7 who are saying, did we not do all these great things in your name? They are the people who said that Jesus was Lord and even behaved a certain way, but their heart was not right and their heart was not in it. That's who they are. It's because something that's both encouraging and intimidating is that God judges us by our heart. reaction to them should be to encourage them in their doing of good and to take them up on their good intentions of heart, and to gently and lovingly teach them the way of God more accurately. I'm thinking in particular of the relationship that the two tent makers who worked with Paul had with Priscilla and Aquila, thank you. And the guy who knew only the baptism of John, was it Apollos? Yeah, like what they did for him, that would be a real world example. And the quote that was relevant in the story earlier when Jesus told them, leave that guy alone who's healing people in my name, Jesus said, whoever is not against us is for us, which is an interesting inverse to something that he said, I think, more often, whoever is not for me is against me.
Daryl, then Carl.
We know that these people called him Lord, that they prophesied in his name, that they did miracles in his name, and they were expecting to be rewarded. But if you look at verse 20, and incorporate the context of the passage here, we also know the fruits were bad. Thus, he says, depart from me, I know you not. So,
Good.
you know, that fruit thing is important.
Yep.
That's
Who these people are.
Know them by their fruits, yeah.
There is a danger in false teaching, but I do believe that this prophecy in Matthew 7:7 speaks to those who are truly seeking God. Asking shall be given to you, seeking you will find, knocking will be open to you, for everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it shall be opened. So that's a promise from God that if we're sincere about seeking him, we will find him.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Dylan?
Had in like Luke 6:46 and also in Matthew 7:21, it says, "Everyone who says to me, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven." So obviously the things that they were doing were not dedicated toward the actual will of God.
Right.
It's like doing these things for show, even in the name of Christ, but they aren't the actual things that God wants done.
Right. Yeah, doing the wrong things or not doing the right things, either one is wrong. I'm going to move along real quickly here. We've already talked about Revelation 22 and what happens if anyone tries to take away or add to the book. It says God will take away his share in the tree of life in the holy city, which are described in this book. I was going to talk a little bit about, Nadab and Abihu is what brings it home to me. When I was a new Christian, I kind of probably had that mindset. Well, God is merciful, God is kind. Surely, you don't have to do things perfectly or whatever. But this story kind of brings it to me. It's important when God specifically tells us what to do. It's important to do it. Do what he says, how he says to do it. They simply burned the wrong and unauthorized fire, and they died. Okay, so what are the results of these differences that we've been talking about? What are the results of having all this division and denominations and all of this?
Well, one of the main results is that it is discrediting to religion as such, because this is an interesting thing. People have, even people who aren't religious, have the ability to know what rings false. And so when they are told things that ring false, and those things are preached to them as religion or as Christianity specifically, they then associate that silliness or that wrongness or that stupidity with religion or Christianity. And that makes it rougher for those of us who are actually seeking souls.
Good point.
Causes some discouragement. I know many people that were so turned off by the denomination. They don't want to listen to the truth.
True. 1 Corinthians 14:33 tells us that God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. So what you're talking about confuses people, right? People, all these religions, they all believe different things. That's confusing, and I'm sure it does just turn people off where they don't want any part of any of it. And so if God is not the author of confusion, then division cannot be from God, is the point here, right? It cannot be. In fact, he warns us. And then, of course, one of my favorite verses in the Bible, Isaiah 55, 8 and 9, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, and it goes on. So the ones who disagree with the Bible or don't understand it need to understand that God knows us and he knows what's best for us. Okay, I got to pick and choose a few things here. Why did, when we talk about speak where the Bible speaks, oops, it was already up, wasn't it? And be silent where it's silent. People will bring that up. They want to do something in their life and they say, well, the Bible doesn't specifically say I can't. Why didn't God just give us a big list of do's and don'ts?
He told us what to do, and that's what we do. We don't argue with it.
Yep. Jacob.
Well, there's also an interesting presupposition in the Bible, and that is God, and this in and of itself takes faith, he gives us credit for having good sense. Like, the Bible is written in such a way as to be instructions for people who are seeking, and God considers the instructions that he gave us enough. If he were to list off every solitary thing that we ought not to do, like individually, I mean, first of all, the Bible would then be the length of the encyclopedia, and second of all, people wouldn't bother with that list because it's a book for people who are seeking anyway.
Right. Yeah, can you imagine the Bible telling the people in the early Christian church, be careful what you look at on the internet? Would make no sense to them. Okay, I'm out of time, but let me summarize real quick. So the summary is, change your oil every 3,000 miles. No. The Bible is the truth. It's the complete truth. It's all we need. We don't need man-made creed books. We need to do what the Bible tells us to do, not do what there's no authority for, and don't confuse sound doctrine with the commandments of men. So, thank you all for your attention and comments.